So guys, I do want to do another tough video series, and I do think that this is very important. And I do want to talk about, tough on homework. So, when I was a kid, my parents were always really like harsh and tough on me when I did homework. And there are a bunch of lessons about this that I think sometimes we always want the best for our children, and sometimes this turns into unrealistic expectations, or sometimes when they have an issue, like with typos, or they read things too quickly, there's always a way to teach children instead of being condescending or undermining. And sometimes if we say things in ways that are condescending and undermining, we can take a child and we can not teach them, the importance of improving themselves or bettering themselves, and then we can actually make them unmotivated, or they grow up to people that are like, you know what, I don't want to do the best that I can really, because I imagine everybody in the world screaming and yelling at me. Or I was taught, the figure it out method, which means that people flip out on you if you don't know the answer and say, oh well, you're smart, you know when you don't know. Or I've also had teachers, and I'll tell you guys a bunch of stories. So the first and probably the most famous story is that I had a math teacher, Mrs. Bailey, who was a very great woman. She was a really nice person. And one time we did this project where we got $1 million. We had to write a paper about how we would spend it for 1 million down to zero. And she actually had me go home and rewrite the paper over 30 times because there's always like a little like typo or a grammatic error or a way for it to be better. And I remember it got to a point where my dad actually called the school and told her to stop doing that, because even though she thought that I was somebody with a lot of potential, really, honestly, having somebody rewrite something like 30, 40 times, that's not really appropriate. I was in sixth grade, but also, too, I know that there are editors and there are like book writers who work with editors, and that's more appropriate for that, really. So it was something that wasn't really assignment appropriate. And even though you're trying to teach a method of, okay, well, there's always something to work on, really. It does come off as taxing. It comes off as almost like, you know what, let's move on to the next thing, really. And almost like, a little just kind of like, well, double standards, because we believe in Byron's potential. He has to do something 30 times, but Kelvin, this kid in my class who was always getting in trouble, you know what, he doesn't do his homework, you know what, like, he doesn't get that, that issue. Um, the other issue I remember was when I was a kid, my parents always had issues of, being harsh with my homework. So I remember like and I remember like, like when I was in middle school, I would break down and cry sometimes when my parents would expect me to write up papers, or make me stay up past like 1 in the morning, correcting things and sounding out words in very harsh and undermining ways, or threatening me, like saying, if you erase the paper, either if there's too many erase marks on the paper, you're gonna have to rewrite it and all that. And I think my response was always just pressure and anxiety, and I would lie a lot saying that I didn't have any homework because I just didn't want to be in that situation anymore. And I think as an adult, I'm kind of like, what, like I work at a hospital. I would never want to be a nurse. I would never want to be a surgeon. I would never want to be a manager, because it came down from that feeling in childhood of, if you apply yourself or people know that you're intelligent, they're going to force you to do things that you don't want to do, or they're going to force you to have challenges that will just overwhelm you, and people expect you to be an expert, really. I know, like, there was another time where I didn't do my homework, and I was like in second grade. My dad like took we had like this Halloween, we had this Valentine's Day party, and I remember my dad's taking all my candy and all the cookies that other people made and cakes other people made and brought home with me, and he just like threw the trash right in front of my face, and he was kind of like glaring, like, what, like as if the cops brought me home, really. And I kind of was like more upset, not because of all the sweets. I was kind of more upset that people worked hard to cook with their children, bake cookies with their children, bake cakes with their children. pay for pizza and whatever, and my dad was just throwing it in the trash because he wanted to get through to me that I don't deserve it because I didn't do my homework. But I did grow up in the '90s where parents would be, as I said, they expect us to be little Einsteins, I remember that was just also another harsh method, and I also remember one time in middle school, I had an issue with typos, so my dad forced me to take a book and randomly just type up like 3 or 4 chapters of it, like 20 pages, and said, "Okay, now you learn how to write without typos." And that was like one of the stupidest things he ever did, because it's like that's not teaching anybody sentence structure. And if I was to say anything, I didn't ever really learn how to write a sentence until I went to college. Subject, verb, um, and grammatical stuff. That was not really ever taught to me. And even had teachers tell me, what, wait until college to learn those things. We're not going to teach you those things. So just wait until college, like verb tense and all that stuff, really. So yeah, and it wasn't good because I remember like I had like um a history professor, American history, no, American history teacher in high school, but she was really kind of big about saying, okay, well, this kid can't write well. We need to put him in a remedial class or a special needs class, because that's kind of what they did. They did a lot of pooling where someone had mental health issues because I was misdiagnosed with autism. Their goal was not to put you in mainstream classes. Their goal was to put you in all the special needs classes. And one of the things was that if you had a lot of typos or you had a lot of like poor English skills, they wouldn't like blame a teacher, because I was going to tell her that I worked with my American literature teacher who told me good English skills don't matter. Wait until you go to college and they'll teach you how to write well. So I did kind of grow up with a lot of teachers that believed in like not teaching me or passing things on, really, but also other teachers that would be like, okay, well, since this person has issues with writing, we need to recommend putting him in special needs writing classes, when that's more just to that's more just to really put kids in programs, just because that gets all funded by the state and all that. And then also too that if I had a writing tutor, or if I had somebody who was actually teaching me to slow down and teaching me to just work on typing and say, okay, that's a general problem that that needs to be approached with sensitivity and understanding, and not undermining or condescending or acting like, okay, well, that's wrong, really being very nitpicky. um, that's that's another issue. I also remember, like in high school, my other father would flip out on me because I remember really I spelled the word Jupiter with an I at the end, because when people say Jupiter, it sounds like the word sounds like Jupiter. I've heard people say it that way, so I remember like there were being some errors. I remember my dad flipping out at me and just kind of undermining, and then kind of just snickering at me like, I'm gonna be an asshole to you. And that's one of the reasons why I don't hang out with my father, because I remember like my senior year of high school. Sometimes if I looked a little sleepy, he would make me go to bed at 7. He would always check my homework. He would always kind of be undermining and condescending. I know, like one time, and I will do another video. I was telling my girlfriend that I was struggling with depression and maybe was thinking of suicide. And my dad was kind of like sneaking behind me while I was talking to her on the phone, and just to kind of like, surprise, I'm gonna sneak behind you. And he was like saying things like, I'm gonna beat the fucking shit out of your dead body if you ever do it, and other things like that. Really, who's gonna take care of me when I'm old? So I did kind of so. That's also another thing that happens too when you have parents check homework, is sometimes that it may be a power trip to them. They may just do that just to be an asshole to their kids, or they may try to, or the method may be, I'm gonna be an asshole to you just because you're my son, and I want to maybe be hard on you because you're gonna go to college, and maybe you're gonna like not want anything to do with me because I'm gonna teach you independence, because you're gonna not want anything to do with me because I'm gonna be a jerk to you. Or it's your senior year of college, it's your senior year of high school, I'm gonna be a jerk to you as much as I can because I want to get it out of my system, because you're not gonna be my child anymore. So there's also power trips in it. I also remember that there's a lot of censorship, because I remember like one time I wrote about my experience at Wagner Middle School when I was in Guilford High School. Wagner Middle School is a middle school in in New York City. There was a lot of bullying, and actually there's an article of of a teacher suing the school because he was gay and he faced a lot of homophobia, and the school did nothing about that when students were doing that to him. And then he was also defending a gay student who was dealing with homophobia. But I remember, like, my dad would always proofread my homework, and if there's something that he did not like, he would actually just say, like, no, you're not going to write that. And he was said something like Wagner Middle School is like the best school. It was always clean. Your autistic brain is making things up, and that really hurt me for a long time. And sometimes you're gonna deal with parents who are like that. Like, I'm mixed race, but I did have parents that had this mentality that I'm a proud black man. And you read about how great it is to be a black kid adopted by gay white parents. Whenever I went to middle school or whenever I had experiences that were rough, it's like, nah, that didn't happen. The parents' perspective. So, and also too, when I went to college, I've had professors do that too. Instead of writing about overcoming trauma, they want me to write about being a black child, adopted by two gay white men that love me. Just, and then all the solution to all my problems is just to have the mentality that black is beautiful. Like, my professors had that. So that also happens too with parents and also with professors and other teachers, where sometimes they may take a student and they'll be like, okay, you're going to write what we want to write you. All black people who are adopted write about being, write about their happiness being adopted by white people. And if it's a gay couple, you got to talk about how great it is that you have gay parents. If you're a mixed race like me, what you have to do is say that you're black when actually you're white. You have to be the token black minority, and damn sure you're going to get a big slap across the face by your parents if you say otherwise. So there was a lot of just also that as well. Really, I can't write the real truth about my life. I have to write what other people's versions were, and that's also very soul crushing, and that also is very bad because that promotes very bad writing. That says everybody has to be a token. Nobody can tell the truth about their lives. It has to be whatever the parents' way is. And that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of people like me grow up and we want nothing to do with our parents. Or whenever I had art exhibits or whenever I did writing projects in college, I would never want my parents involved or my parents to be supportive, or I would never learn to stand up and fight and argue with my professors because I've always been taught, what, you have no power. People have authority over you, and you have to write what other people want you to write. Really, all brown people are African Americans, and they have to write about being proud African Americans. And whenever they experience racism, black is beautiful is what the message is, instead of actual really deep thought. So it's not good when we also have a mentality of censoring our children and also not teaching them to kind of be writers that will argue and will want to get their message across. And the best thing to do is help somebody get their message across. That's what That's what good teachers do. Not, we're going to censor your message because we have a look at African Americans and people from other races that is stereotypical and want to enforce the stereotypes. Like, blacks have to write about being proud black people. People who are black people who are adopted need to talk about it's great to be adopted into another family of another race, and how great it is that the other race actually came in and helped out, really. So yeah, those things are very, very rough. I'm also going to think a little bit. I do think that um, the other thing too was that I did get a psychological evaluation when I was in high school, before I went to college, and then one of the things it said that I have an issue of compulsive lying, and it came from like two things. It came from that I had an addictive personality, so I had a bad habit of lying. I overcame that, and I also had a bad habit of lying because what happened was I never got an allowance, so sometimes I would steal money from my brothers, or sometimes if I had an allowance in last like 2 years of high school. So if I bought like if I worked, and I also worked at a store. So if I bought like candy bars, or I went school trips and I actually bought things, teachers would rat me out to my parents, be like, okay, Byron bought a block of cheese. Or if I remember my dad went to Europe one time, and I bought eggs and bacon and cheese, so I can make an omelet when I came home from work, because my grandmother was cool, but she would like rat me out to my parents. And the big thing was that they were like, okay, nobody eats an omelet with. The rule is if you're gonna make an omelet or scrambled eggs, it's 2 eggs maximum. If I order a pizza, it's impossible to order a pizza because you know what, nobody eats more than 2 slices. Like my parents had those really strict rules, you know. And then also when it came to lying, it was also about homework because I would a lot of times I would say I didn't have homework because my parents would always be really really strict with how it was. So sometimes it's also that thing too of, you know, some people will say, let's look at the psychological evaluation and let's hear what the parents have to say, but let's not actually kind of dissect it and open it and say, okay, you know, the issue is actually how the parents come off really. And then the last issue is my parents were a lot like Chris Rock's dad, very, very cheap. So in I remember like in middle school, my I would always get a B in my science class because I never did the science fair project. Every semester we had to do a fair project, but I never did it, and my teacher was really nice enough to not give me a bad grade. But the reason why I didn't do that is because if I was to do that, my parents would get mad that I would have to ask them for money. And I also remember like in high school too, like there was like a science fair project that I had to do and I didn't do it. And then my dad found out and he asked me why I didn't do that. And I said like, I know that you would have been mad at me if I asked you for money. And my dad kind of was like, you know, saying there's a difference between, you know, asking me, you know, $50 to buy a video game and asking me to do a science project. You need to learn how to ask people for things. But my parents he didn't really grasp the fact that he had a record whenever I asked him for money, he would just always like. I remember like one time I wanted to go on a trip where we were mining for I think Herculites or other like crystals and whatever, and my dad was just looking at that, and it was $400. My dad was laughing his ass off, like, I'm not gonna I'm not gonna pay $400. Because my dad was that much of a cheap bastard. I didn't even get a high school ring because again, my parents said it was a ripoff, but my brothers did. So it's kind of like, you know, that thing too of, you know, one of the reasons why I didn't do my homework assignments or I didn't ask for money, or even when I was in middle school, or even elementary school, I didn't ask my parents. And sometimes I paid for my own field trips, or sometimes there were class parties and everybody had to chip in $10, $20. My teachers would ask me, and naively so, I would say that I would pay for it because my parents would just always go into conniptions about spending money. And my dad would say, you make me look like a cheap bastard. But then it's like, you know, Dad, you always have to have drama when you speak. I remember like even in middle school, I got in trouble with my dad because I would run in my school clothes and I would tell the coach and everybody, you know, my dad would go into conniptions whenever I asked him for money. And also, too, I never really liked it when he bought me track clothes because he always buys me the shortest shorts that my ass sticks out, and everybody thinks that, you know what, maybe I'm sus, you know. So I think that part of it's also, as I said, when you have parents that are overly reacted, over opinionated, and then just not telling their kid that the role is that if you need something for school, that's way different than asking for like a video game or asking for $50 to I don't know, buy their first lottery ticket when they're 18 years old, you know. So, you know, it's definitely, you know, I never learned to communicate with my parents. And I also think that they came off as very harsh and condescending and emotionally immature and just, you know, just very and having unrealistic expectations. The other thing too that kind of is similar to homework is pop quizzes. Like I remember there was that famous like dinosaur quiz. Like my parents would want us to watch Reading Rainbow or other PBS shows in the early '90s, and then my parents would quiz us. And I remember like one time there was something like if we passed my dad's quiz, we would go out for breakfast and have like pancakes and waffles and like all that really good stuff. If not, we had cold oatmeal. And I remember like my dad giving my brother a question, and my brother is like autistic. My brother just isn't as smart. So he was like taking advantage of him. And then also he said something like, you know, how do you know that dinosaurs exist or don't exist? And I think like the answer to that was, you know, it's all theory, you know, and it's all like, you know, it's theory backed by evidence or something like that. But my brother didn't get that. And I remember like that we failed. We had to eat bad cereal. My dad was kind of like laughing at us, and my brother got mad, and my dad just grabbed him and threw him on the timeout chair, and was kind of yelling and cursing at him. And it got to a point where my dad decided not to do any more pop quizzes because he realizes that he takes things too far, or he probably realized that he wanted to be a cheap bastard really. So he just wanted to kind of give my brother a question that he couldn't answer. And each time I wanted to help him out, he would tell me to shut up and like let my brother answer. And again, how do you build a kid's self-esteem? And then also again, you're teaching, oh well, I'm gonna take advantage of my own son really, who doesn't know how to answer questions, who takes things too literally, who's also autistic. And part of my brother's issue was taking things literally, or not being a deep and philosophical thinker or an abstract thinker really. So it was clearly just taking advantage of a kid with a disability because he wanted to actually, save a couple of bucks, really. And then the other thing too is that, does that teach a kid to actually work hard and want to be educated? What does that teach me about teamwork, or saying that you got to be, whenever your brother fucks up, you have to suffer the price, collective punishment, which my parents don't believe in. Because when I was a kid, if one kid was bad, the whole classroom got detention. But if you and your brother had to be quizzed together on something, and you couldn't help him out, and your brother is an idiot and couldn't figure things out and was kind of dumb and wasn't really an abstract thinker. I know I'm using some harsh words, and he's being taken advantage of. How am I going to feel about my brother? I'm going to be like, okay, well, I'm not going to be successful because I have a dumbass for a brother, really. It's just, it creates more negative feelings than actual encouraging somebody to learn. And then it also says, too, that, okay, you know what, if my parents want to save a couple of bucks and they are in a situation like that, they're easily going to take advantage of my brother because of his mental health issues. So it also kind of goes down to, bully parenting and taking advantage, and that was never right. And I also remember how I think one time there was a sushi incident I'll talk to you guys about, where we were in middle school and my dad was asking my brother to think of a food that he's never had before, and my brother couldn't come up with an answer. So my parents flipped out and says, "Name a fucking food. Name a fucking food. You're the kid who loves food." And my brother was saying, stop thinking that I'm fucking Einstein. So they grabbed my brother and they threw him into a chair, and the stool actually broke, and they're showing pieces of the stool. So they were kind of being very harsh and undermining, thinking that he was being a smart ass when he couldn't come up with an answer. And then I remember, like, in my brain saying, I really hate having a family. I really wish I didn't have this family. And I just learned never to ask questions or whatever, because that's how my parents reacted, really. And I think it was kind of almost like they both had a bad day, so they're tag team bullying my brother. And I also would say, like, imagine the type of violence and force they had to do when they had to push him so hard that he fell on a stool and it broke, really. And then the next thing was that there was the plagiarism incident where my brother plagiarized he had a science fair project. I believe he was 8 or 9 years old, really. So what happened was he plagiarized. So my dad took the paperwork, his essay. They spent hours and hours writing. I mean, he ripped it up in his face and saying, like, you know what, you're gonna go to jail. We're gonna call the cops. Really, you're gonna get sued. And my brother was screaming no and crying and all that. And I remember my brother trying to run out of the house. My dad grabbed him and pulled him back in. Really, but again, that's just not appropriate. There's teaching people to quote books and other things and how to do things correctly, but you don't take an 8-year-old. And we grew up in the '90s, so you had to rewrite everything, really. But I also remember, like, one time in high school, I did the exact same thing. I plagiarized. My dad was asking me about it, and I was like remembering, okay, he's gonna make me rewrite the whole thing. And then told him, like, I just forgot to quote it. I'll just, like, quote it. They taught us how to do quotes the right way, really. But again, all this just taught really both of us that our parents were just, they probably did it for a power trip. They probably did it because maybe their parents were really, really harsh. And they probably just did it because they had expectations for us to be, to have some sense of education, really. But when you are harsh and undermining, you never really get your point across. And then sometimes, if you have some unrealistic goals and unrealistic expectations, it motivates somebody to not really want to do their best. Like, as I said, I grew up into a person that's like, well, fuck being a nurse, fuck being a surgeon, fuck being an X-ray person, fuck being a CEO of a hospital. I don't want those responsibilities because I always have it in my head that I can imagine my father yelling and screaming at me, or one of the reasons why I don't have relationships because I can imagine marrying a woman and then she's like, you know what, you gotta be a CEO, you gotta take out your penis, get me pregnant, have 5 kids, and then you got to be a manager. Then you got to be a CEO. You got to do this. You got to do that. And I learned that that's kind of how relationships are. It's power struggles. You know, I had a girlfriend who would always agree with me and always would do everything that I wanted to do, and that was not the relationship. And I avoid relationships because I was always taught from growing up that relationships are somebody bossing you around, and that's why I like being single. So this was something that really affected my mentality. You know, so definitely we have to just understand that the goal with homework and the goal with educating our kids and encouraging education should always be being that making kids inspired to be better, inspired to have a level of sense and education really. And if we are harsh or undermining or bullying, or if we quiz our kids and we take advantage of our kids because we don't want to spend extra money on a reward or whatever, all you're doing is discouragement. And I think that I'm very proud of this video because I know there's a lot of just stories of very harsh parenting when it came to doing homework. And it's good to share this one.